first introduction to the Ybor community was when the Public Art Committee invited me to lunch to meet them and go over what the whole project was. We met at the Columbia restaurant, and that was my first real initiation into Ybor and the community, and it was fantastic. I had my first Cuban sandwich, so I know I had to go back there several times just to make sure I understood the whole cultural part of it and eat more Cubans. One of the things I did to learn about Ybor was to walk the streets, and I would talk to anybody who would sit and talk to me. Or there were a lot of friendly people who would sit and tell me their family history, where they grew up, how relatives had moved to Westshore, their gardens, pretty much anything that had to do with the history of their family. They were willing to tell me. One of the major goals of this project was to try and reunite culturally the people of Ybor. When the I-4 interstate came through in the early 60s, it literally separated Tampa, or Ybor, into two halves, the north side and the south side. And it was like putting a great wall between, right down the center of the city. It separated families, the generations. There could be, the parents might live on the south side and their children and their families lived on the north side. And there was not easy access between them through the I-4 construction and the final project. So a lot of the families on the north side moved to West Tampa and elsewhere and formed new communities. With the new I-4 project going through, the reconstruction, one of the main driving forces of the committee doing the design work was to try and put open vistas where you could see through, people could feel welcome between the two, the north side and the south side. Instead of having a wall, there were portals to go through. My role in the project was to create cultural medallions for the overpass bridges on the two sides of the bridges, the embankment sides, that depicted the rich culture of the community, Ybor community, in the past, that would help reunite the city so that people could say, oh yeah, I remember that, and that's part of our heritage, and that was really what I was after. So when I was exploring Ybor, one of my main things was, give me the cultural information. I need to know all this stuff because I'm an outsider. I was coming in looking at it from the outside, and I really got to know Ybor, and it's a great city. Great people. One of the rich sources of information from my research was the Ybor City Museum. And it's housed in the Ferlita Bakery. Well, it used to be the Ferlita Bakery. And it's a fantastic building. I used it in one of the medallions as one of the main features in the food medallion. Also, there's a well-known picture of Master Baker Ralph Ray's baking bread. I incorporated that into the design of the medallion. In going around and talking to people on the street, and especially I would try and find houses where in the yard there was a garden, and boy, there was some strange fruit and vegetables I had never seen, and I came to find out that a lot of them were vegetables that were indigenous to Cuba, you know, in other areas outside of here, some Spain, and they weren't native fruits and vegetables, but they were very important to the community in making food that reflected the culture. One of the great sources of information for this project was the Burgert Brothers photo collection at the Hillsborough Library. Tampa is so lucky to have this great documentation that spans such a long period of time. You can go back and it seems like every intersection in the city has several photographs over time taken by the family in their business, and it was fantastic. I could go find information about streetcars, you know, what the style was. I could go find information about the bicycles, the casita houses, it was great. I couldn't do a cultural representation of Ybor without doing the cigar factories. So in researching all the cigar factories, how they would hand roll them, the drying and everything, the sorting of the leaves, tobacco leaves. One of the things that struck me most about the whole process was not the making of the cigars per se, but what was going on culturally, how the workers got together and hired the lectors who would sit and read to them, and it would be anything from the newspaper in Tampa, the newspapers back home, across the seas, or poetry, novels. It was a really culturally enriching experience for the workers, and very welcomed, and so that needed to be represented. So in the lector medallion, it shows the lector reading, and the pictures that I used for reference were one of the better known lectors of the time. So he's up on his seat and the workers are working down below, and represented the working of the tobacco, rolling the cigars, the hands down there in the process along the lower edge. It was a hard medallion to do because of the factory look of it, all the wooden beams, getting them to look right in proportion, or in perspective, I'm sorry, the perspective of them all lining up one in front of the other. It was really hard to layer those, and I remember that was a nightmare trying to get that to come off successfully so it looked like you were looking back into the factory. Image in the social medallion, I used dancers from the Centro Asturiano Spanish Social Club that is pretty well known, and it also depicted the environment around the dancers, so you got to see the social club, the construction of the building. On the outskirts surrounding the medallion, I tried to put in some of the social gaming that was going on, and there were card games, things like that going on, but there was also bolita, little ball, which was a form of lottery that sometimes had a shady past or aspect to it that affected the community in a lot of ways. So I thought it was important to put that in because it is part of the heritage of Ybor. One of the hardest medallions that we worked on was trying to decide what was the most appropriate things to put in the home medallion. What represented the home in Ybor City? Well, we knew the casitas were very important because that's where the workers lived. They could rent to buy the house. All the houses had similar construction, very distinctive style, and they were well designed for the environment. They sort of had their own cooling system in the way they were designed for the hot summers. So we knew that the casitas had to be there, but it was hard coming up with what went around the casita. The streetcars were important, the form of transportation, bicycles, all kinds of games in the yard that the kids would play and stuff. Very protective community. So it ended up being the bicycle as the sort of independent type of transportation that you could go anywhere, do anything. So we chose the bicycle as the main feature in front of the casita, with a group of family members in the back. The sculpting process starts with the design. The design, I'll go through many renditions and I'll bounce ideas off the committee, see what they think. They'll have some feedback, and we kind of work together because part of what I do as a public artist is I try and create projects that the community can live with. They're the ones that are going to have it in their community. They should have some say in it, and they should like the piece. For the medallions, the first thing I had to do was cut out 2 large discs out of MDF wood, 5-foot diameter, and secure them together in such a way that it will resist the warpage over time of them just sitting. I need it to be very strong and very rigid and hold its shape. From there I start building the surface up using foam as a filler to try and keep the weight down a little bit, because those 2 pieces of wood are pretty heavy. Then I start adding the clay. Start building it up to match the design. And a lot of decisions have to be made in terms of the layering of the clay to make sure that it reads correctly in perspective and in scale. I have to keep in mind that these medallions are generally going to be seen from about 100 feet or more away, is going to be the typical viewing. So they need to be bold, stark in terms of the line definition, creating shadows that read well from a distance. The last thing that goes on is the border. The border goes on to finish off the piece, and it creates a separation between the wall panels of the bridge embankment, so that there's a good definition between the brick surface and the medallion. Gathering the information to design the Ybor medallions was a lot of fun. It was relatively easy to do because the community had such a rich culture, and so many people still remember the years gone by that I could have access to, and rich documentation in the libraries, the La Gaceta newspaper. It was just rich with cultural information. For Westshore, it was a lot harder to try and design medallions that truly represented what the Westshore community was about. It's a relatively young community. There's some small neighborhoods that in pockets that are still there that are wonderful places, and the people there were very, very forthcoming with their cultural information, family histories. But it's a very commercial area with cutting-edge technology going on, commercial business, commerce, and it was how to depict those successfully. Because Westshore has such a commercial image of large commercial buildings, glass buildings, I wanted to show that Westshore was also a recreational area full of nature, and it has a soft side to the community. Going to Cypress Point Park, I walked the shores, I collected shells, I took pictures of shells, birds, crabs, the plants, anything I could find at Westshore, the pavilions for picnics. It's a great place to go to get out of the city and still be in the city. Tampa International Airport is a key feature of Westshore, and we wanted to make sure that was depicted in the medallions. I used a prop airplane instead of a jet engine because it represents that Tampa Airport has a rich history. It was one of the early airports in the country, and was key in the development of aviation. One of the neat things I got to do in researching the Westshore community was to visit Carver City and Lincoln Gardens. They're two of the older communities in the area. The population's been changing, but it still has a lot of the residents who go back to the 50s and earlier, who remember what it was like in the community. So there were a lot of great stories there, and the community center for the kids, the recreational center, is just to die for. There's so much going on there with the activities. It's great facilities, swimming, basketball, everything is top notch, and the kids there were having a ball, and it was a good time. I really enjoyed visiting those kids that day. For commerce, there are so many buildings that could be used for reference, and I did a lot of designs that the committee looked at because we were trying to find one that was sort of generic to represent all the community without being specific that, oh, that's the one building. We needed everybody to feel included in it. And the final design ended up being more of a industrial park type area that's on the higher end, the business side of a business park. So there's the water, there's water so important in the Tampa region, the plants, and just the idyllic setting of a commercial business park. The best part of working on these projects was having the opportunity to learn about Tampa and working with some great talented people on the committees. It was special too knowing that I was contributing to the great collection of works in the Tampa Public Art Collection.